I think I and many of you watching this video right now, the reason why you clicked on it is because you're a massive fan of the Last of Us franchise and especially the Last of Us single player games. And I think what we all want to know is what's going on with the Last of Us Part 3, when are we going to be getting this game, and also what's going on with the Last of Us faction and how is that affecting the Last of Us Part 3. Well, we've got some reports about Sony's internal shakeup plans for their live service games divisions, and with Jim Ryan stepping down, we've got some brand new questions over the state of PlayStation and what this could mean for The Last of Us Part 3. So we've got this new report which I found on TrueTrophies.com, and I've seen other news articles also reporting on the same thing, but I'll read TrueTrophies.com, which says Sony allegedly trimming PlayStation Studios' 12-game live service plan. Sony's live service games plan has reportedly been scaled back for PlayStation Studios, with the Japanese company watching similar titles die repeatedly on PlayStation 5. The article reads, PlayStation Studios is reportedly easing off the gas on Sony's live service games push over the course of the next few years. Sony's first party developers were supposed to produce as many as 12 live service PS5 games, but a recent report suggests plans may have changed. The original article was reported by xfire.com, which says Sony doubting its multi-billion-dollar commitment on games as a service. For what it's worth, Sega and Bandai have a history of working together with Sony on PlayStation exclusive over the years. According to Reset Era user Head on the Block, Sony forced several first parties to work on an online game, but Sony is reversing course and it said that it's using third party to catch up on some IPs. The anonymous user named Sega and Bandai Namco as two companies that are helping Sony out, with the former in particular working on an IP that'll wipe the floor. However, they're careful to note that it's going to be at least 4 years until some of these changes are seen. Sega and Bandai Namco have a history of working with Sony, so that part of this leak makes sense, but until otherwise confirmed, we're betting that we'll only get hints, never an actual confirmation. It's best to take this with a grain of salt. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we got reports that the progress of The Last of Us factions is not going well. Bungie Studios had a look at the game and they saw the game as not being quite up to scratch. They even told NaughtyDog to scale back the game. And now the recent reports are that the game Last of Us faction is now on ice. Not only that, but we just got the latest news that Bungie's marathon is now been delayed till 2025. Also, there are some reports that have said that the Last of Us factions was iced, but now it's been cancelled. The article then continues by saying, following this, many have questioned the sustainability of Sony's games as a service approach, especially after a renowned studio like Naughty Dog couldn't deliver. So if a game like Last of Us faction has indeed been cancelled, this is actually good news for The Last of Us Part 3 and the new Naughty Dog IP that's in development. Both games will now become at the centre of Naughty Dog's focus, and The Last of Us faction will now just be a thing of the past. It is unfortunate because it was rumoured that The Last of Us faction will have some sort of storyline to connect to The Last of Us and expand that universe, but if it wasn't developing the way they hoped, I'm glad that they cancelled it instead of just forcing it down our throats. The article then goes on to say, while it's possible to interpret the recent rumours as Sony pulling away from games as a service following the imminent resignation of Jim Ryan, some believe the company is merely recalibrating its strategy. It's worth noting that Sony has invested heavily in this area, especially with its acquisition of Bungie. Their expertise in live service is invaluable, and Sony's substantial financial commitment suggests that they are unlikely to abandon ship based solely on a single game's failure. If true, what's happening is a more nuanced approach. Sony could be focusing on assigning specific studios like Bungie to spearhead high quality live services, while letting the other studios traditionally rooted in single player experiences continue in their own domain or transition at a more organic pace, depending on their preference. The abrupt shift of single player studios to games as a service could have been a miscalculation on Sony's part, one they are now rectifying. I think this, if true, is brilliant news, especially for The Last of Us Part 3 and other single player projects. The last PlayStation showcase was so heavily focused on live service games. It did really look like Sony is going all in on live service games, and it did put that kind of doubt and fear into fans that maybe Sony is going to take a back seat to the single player space in terms of a more favorable monetizable approach with games as a service. And although I'm not a fan of games as a service games, I don't play games like Destiny Destiny and Warframe, there is a market for good games as a service games, and the big term being good. And I was actually excited for The Last of Us Factions because I thought it was being created by Naughty Dog, it's by a franchise that I love, and I hope that it would be as good as an experience as Destiny is for its fan base, but for the Last of Us universe. So for Sony to be scaling back the games as a service approach is a massive win for single player games fans, and I think the massive success of Marvel Spider-Man 2 also cements the future of Sony single player games. So if Last of Us Factions has been iced and cancelled, it could mean that we are going to be getting Last of Us Part 3 sooner than expected. Remember that Neil Druckman also has a storyline for The Last of Us Part 3 already laid out, but it seemed like his focus was being maintained on The Last of Us Factions, which has now hopefully been cancelled if it was indeed not the game it was going to be promised as. The article further goes on to read, however, completely reversing the games as a service course seems implausible, especially with significant projects in development. Changing a game's fundamental design midway, especially transitioning between games as a service and single player, doesn't result in a favorable outcome. Thus, it might be more about streamlining and optimizing the games as a service workflow than outright abandonment. This approach would make sense after Sony invested billions in the genre again earlier this year, suggesting that it still firmly believes in its promise to release close to a dozen online games by 2026. So we'll also have to wait to see who the next head of PlayStation is going to be, and to see what direction they could be taking PlayStation in. Maybe the next head of PlayStation is in this meeting of Sony's to refine their games as a service approach rather than outright abandoning it, and also to allow studios like Naughty Dog and Insomniac to maintain their single player games focus. Now, I don't know if Naughty Dog was forced to make this Last of Us Faction game. It doesn't seem like they were, because Neil Druckman has talked heavily about how much creative freedom and freedom as a whole studio that Sony gives Naughty Dog, that they could literally do whatever they want. So maybe it was a passion project by Neil Druckman and it wasn't going the way they hoped, and what the game that Bungie advised them to create instead just wasn't the vision of Neil Druckman, and that's why it just wasn't up to the standard that he initially envisioned. So the big takeaway in terms of The Last of Us Part 3 and the next Naughty Dog project is that it should be coming a lot sooner than initially expected. It seems like a very disappointment and bad news in terms of Last of Us Factions, and for those people, including myself, who did want to see what this game was going to be and hope for it to expand the Last of Us universe. However, it seems like we will be getting The Last of Us Part 3 a lot sooner, and we get to see this brand new IP from Naughty Dog a lot sooner too. I also made a video about how Neil Druckman said that he would like to make a Punisher game, and who knows, maybe this could be the next new IP for Naughty Dog. I'll leave that video in the corner, description and pinned comment section below, along with my many updates for Marvel Spider-Man 2 and Marvel Spider-Man 3, the upcoming major Ghost Recon game, and I'm also working on my Patreon too for exclusive videos on that. So check the description of any of my videos for when that is released, and you'll get brand new exclusive videos on there, and it will just be another way to help support the channel. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Peace out, God bless. Let me know your thoughts on all these major PlayStation updates, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos. Take care, guys.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind.